400 condos and cost over $1 billion to construct. The condos range in price from $1 million for a one-bedroom apartment, nice ratio there, to $18.5 million for a four-bedroom, four-bath, two-floor penthouse apartment near the top of the tower. And just so you all know though, there are about 80 still unsold condos left in that tower. So if you are in the market for a nice little cozy spot here in Chicago, think about the lovely St. Regis as an option. I'll be pointing out these amazing real estate opportunities throughout the tour here today. On your left, this metal and glass triangular shaped building here is the Swiss Hotel. The Swiss Hotel is a hotel, perhaps some of you might be staying there, and it's a triangular design by Harry Weiss. Harry Weiss, very influential architect a few decades ago, who loved triangles. He is obsessed with the shape of the triangle. He put them into just about all of his buildings. So if you're walking around Chicago, maybe even later on this tour, and you see another triangular shaped building, probably the same architect, Harry Weiss. But I love the trio of the three buildings here. You've got that triangular building, that boxy building, and then the wavy building in the background. And I think that's a great little introduction to the way the buildings are always speaking to each other in interesting little ways nowadays. You can always find how they complement each other in terms of style, in terms of shape, how they fit into their environment. That's something that we'll talk a lot about here today, about how buildings, they don't just stand alone anymore, but form a larger woven tapestry of architecture that make up a city. But some Chicago facts for you. As of the 2020 census, there are 2.7 million people living in Chicago. That makes us still the third largest city in the United States, behind New York and Los Angeles. And Chicago is the city on the lake. We have over 20 miles of lakefront, over 20 swimming beaches, 5,300 boat slips, and 10 harbors. And Lake Michigan is such a big part of the culture in Chicago. So much of what we do on nice days in the summer is centered on going to the lake, being by the lake. So I always plug it. If you're looking for a nice, simple activity to do in Chicago, number one thing I recommend is go for a nice walk by the lakefront. You can go for a bike ride, rent a divvy bike. You can sit out by the beach. And again, if you ever get too hot, you just jump right in. Very, very refreshing. On your right, that clock tower building is the Wrigley Building. The Wrigley Building was built in the early 1920s, about 100 years ago. And this is a style of architecture called Spanish Revival style. Spanish Revival style. We call it that because that clock tower was modeled after La Giralda, which is a cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. The clock tower you see up there is similar to the one that you can see in Spain. There are 250,000 glazed terracotta tiles of cream and white that are drawing your eye upward. Terracotta is a material softer than porcelain that must be hand washed with soap and water. Now this is the same Wrigley as in Wrigley Chewing Gum, as in Wrigley Field. And you might be asking yourselves, why exactly is a chewing gum office building in the style of a grand Spanish cathedral? Well, in the early 1920s, the US didn't really have its own identity in architecture. We were still copying lots of European ideas of beauty, putting them into all our buildings. It wouldn't be until later on in the 1920s that we finally get a style really uniquely American. And we'll talk about that style once we see it from the river. But in the meantime, straight ahead, you've got the unmissable Trump International Hotel and Tower. So this is the second tallest tower in Chicago at 1,389 feet from base to spire. And then this is a style of architecture called contextualism. Contextualism. You see those three patios in the building, those three setbacks? Those patios are not at random heights. Each patio corresponds to the height of a neighboring building. That first patio corresponds to the height of the Wrigley Building behind it that we just talked about. That second patio corresponds to the height of the pointy Mathers Tower straight across the river. And the third patio way up there corresponds to the height of this black box building just behind it called the AMA Plaza. But that is contextualism. It is a site-specific design, custom-made for its environment. It's all about blending in with your surroundings, harmonizing with other buildings in your neighborhood. Now, some real estate news. The penthouse in Trump Tower recently resold for $20 million, which was actually $10 million below its asking price, believe it or not. And the building was designed in 2009, so still relatively new, by Adrian Smith. Adrian Smith, he is from Chicago. He's built the tallest towers in the entire world. You'll hear more about him later on. But next one, you're right, gonna be the iconic Cob Towers of Marina City, a Chicagoan favorite, I would say. The Cob Towers, though, that's sort of their unofficial nickname. What a weird nickname, right? I wonder how they got that.
See,
because they look like
look at the
They really, really
Water,
do.
see?
So
Where
back
are we
the
going? We are in the
1960s, nobody was
boat.
really living in the
See?
downtown area of Chicago. In fact, no one was really living in city centers across the
Michelle,
US.
look at
It's more of a
here.
European thing. And there was a man, Bertrand Goldberg, an architect who wanted to change that. He wanted to bring people to live in downtown Chicago in an affordable way. So he built this utopian, vertically stacked world. He built a city within a city. Because in Marina City, you could have nearly everything you could possibly need and live right above the Chicago River. In these buildings, you are going to find restaurants, shops, a swimming pool, a skating rink, a bowling alley, a theater, and of course, parking. Key essentials, living in downtown Chicago. You do have a car, parking can get very, very precious. And we'll see some more from this architect, more circular types of buildings later on.
Oh, restaurant
On your
on
left
there.
is this Riverwalk where everyone's gathering. This is a public amenity that zippers together 1.3 miles of Chicago River shoreline. And it's a perfect example of Chicago-style resiliency. You see these people down here, 20 years ago, before this Riverwalk was built, people didn't really used to come down to the river that much. The river wasn't kind of a destination for people. So the city invested in the future, invested in beauty, and now you can come down and enjoy the river.
Rowing boat, rowing boat.
Go for a walk, listen to live music. It's really become a focal point of our downtown.
No.
The river.
కానీ మన
But on your left is this tall,
Indian దొరకదు కానీ వెళ్దాం అంటే
called 77 West Wacker.
But a view
Now, if you look up at the top of 77
అది
West
పప్పు
Wacker,
అది
you notice this
పప్పు కాదు కానీ
Greek Roman style temple. So this is a style of architecture called neoclassical. You take this classical design, like the Parthenon in this case, and you update it using modern materials of glass.
Say hi.
Now,
Look at here and say hi.
Of this building at nighttime, they glow up the granite in a really spectacular way. But I recommend going for a stroll down here by the Riverwalk at night.
ఇది
See, the city
కూడా
really
PPM
transforms
seafood
from
and
daytime to nighttime. As each
marriages
building
అవి ఏదో
transforms
ఏదో
in a
చేస్తున్నట్టు
specific, unique way. The Riverwalk is a really great way to explore that transformation. And like I said, it's great just to go for a walk here, grab a drink, etc. But this whole area of the city, over to your left, this whole neighborhood of the city, over to your left, is known as the Loop. The Loop. Why do we call it the Loop? Well, we have a public transportation system here, known as the L, which stands for elevated train, because it's supposed to be elevated throughout the city. And these trains, they branch into all the different neighborhoods, and then they converge in the downtown area, and they will literally go in a loop. Hence this whole neighborhood being called the Loop. And Chicago is located where it is today because of the river. You're sailing down. The Chicago River in the 1800s was the waterway that connected the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River, and thus connected the East Coast to the Mississippi River. Barges, kind of like this one, would be just sailing all up and down these waters, carrying merchandise, things of that nature. And we've been a center of trade ever since that time period. And we're also a city that likes to respect its architectural heritage, which you can see over here on the left in the Builders Building. You notice this building was built in two parts. That left-hand side was built in 1927, while that right-hand side was built in 1986. That's about 60 years apart, but you'll notice they're in this very similar style, because they made that new part of the building to complement its historical section, albeit with some fancy new bay windows. So we like to mix the old with the new here in Chicago. Something that is so dynamic about our architecture is that you'll see a 100-year-old building right next to a brand new one. It just makes for a really interesting juxtaposition of style in Chicago. Almost like you get into this little time machine and you jump around to all these different decades. But speaking of going back in time, on your right you got the one, the only, the biggest boy of them all, the Merchandise Mart, or simply the Mart. The Mart is a style of architecture, very important style, that I alluded to earlier, called Art Deco. Art Deco. This has all the classic features of Art Deco. Dark, inset windows, streamlined vertical lines like these racing stripes that draw your eye, up, and this polished Indiana limestone beige color. This was a style for the roaring 1920s. Ornate, elegant, ostentatious. If each generation kind of takes its own values and expresses them in three dimensions through architecture, then the